Okay, barrels and phantom forces, aka the suppressors. They really need a revamp, and today we're gonna crack straight into it. The suppressor barrel revamp in phantom forces. This is gonna be actually a new series that we do, and it's just going to be a take on everything that I think is wrong with the game and potential fixes. Okay, so last week we talked about the optic revamp. I think that was a necessity. The video did really well. And today we're talking about barrel revamp, because there's a lot of changes that need to be made when it comes to barrels. Okay, and before we start into this, if you're new to the channel, we're trying to hit 12,000 subscribers by November. So if you aren't subscribed, hit that sub button. It literally takes half a second. Turn all notifications on. I really appreciate it. We have a Discord server, links in the description if you want to go check it out. But the barrel revamp, most important thing that I want added. I'll throw a picture up what I mean by this, but to start off, before we crack into stats, everything, I want there to be a shot grouping for attachments and how it's affected. So have standard or what old attachments you had versus new attachments. Bad Business does a fantastic job with this, but Phantom Forces really needs it, and it's honestly a shame that it hasn't been done. Next up, I want the 3 most important stats showed on a weapon stats. Okay, so the damage is already there, the fire rate's already there, but I think a reload time would be a fantastic idea to throw right there. I think that's like one of the top 3 most important stats. I think it should go there. There's room for it. And last but not least, on this little stat sheet, I want them to fix the hip, sight, and normal accuracy, because those bars, they don't mean anything. So if you're looking at those bars, you're doing something wrong, because they literally have no effect on the game or the performance of your gun. Okay, and before we get started into it, this is mainly going to be focused on suppressors because they're so freaking busted. They don't even like, they're not even useful, right? So the muzzle brake, the comp, flash hider, Hulbic device, long and short barrels, mufflers, I think they're overall pretty good. I feel like they have a purpose. Okay, I think they're balanced perfectly fine. But this is going to be more focused towards suppressors. So now that we got that all out of the way, we can properly move on to the revamps. Okay, first and foremost, suppressors need to be buffed. They're basically useless. But what if we made them have an effect on recoil performance, just like a muzzle brake or a compensator? What if they actually did something and not just like made your gun sound a little bit better? We're going to be talking about recoil for a second, and then later on we're going to talk about detection radius and damage range and all that. Just for your information, we're starting at 1 page going, and we're going to cover everything. So what if suppressors added a slight recoil reduction based on like a compensator or a muzzle brake? And before I get into this, comment what you think. What do you think about suppressors in the game? I want you guys to I want your opinions. We usually have a couple devs watch this, so maybe we can make a change. That's the whole reason I'm kind of doing this, and maybe we can make something out of it. So let's just put this in an example. Let's just say the PBS1 and the PBS4 suppressors. What if those affected horizontal recoil, which is, you know, what the compensator does? What if it has an effect of that? The PBS4 is a medium suppressor, so what if it reduces horizontal recoil? Kind of like what a compensator does, but only like 70% of it. So the compensator is still better if you want strictly better recoil. But if you want an effect of the suppressor, but you can also get a slight recoil reduction, you throw the PBS4 on. But the PBS1 is a lighter suppressor, so maybe that only reduced the horizontal recoil by like 50% or so, right? And what if we looked at the normal suppressor or the R2 suppressor? What if that affected vertical recoil by the same 50% and 70% of a muzzle brake? So this one would affect vertical recoil. So if you have a gun like the M16A3, but you want a suppressor and you want a little bit of vertical recoil reduction, throw an R2 suppressor on there and you get 50% of what a muzzle brake would do. So you get a little bit of a recoil reduction, but you also get the effect of a suppressor. How does that sound? I think that sounds pretty good. But maybe we have like an ARS suppressor where it would be like a quote-unquote middle ground, and it would be like the stubby grip where it affects vertical and horizontal recoil. Let's say it only does like 25% of what a compensator and a muzzle brake combined would do. So it helps vertical recoil and horizontal recoil just a little bit, just by like 25%. What if that was added? I think that's a good idea, right? And then the oil filter doesn't really have a recoil reduction stat because it's a freaking oil filter, you know. And Osprey, I would pair the Osprey kind of like the ARS. light suppressors. It's a pistol suppressor. Maybe it helps a little bit, but nothing special. So that's my idea on recoil. The next thing I want to talk about is suppressors potentially affecting ADS time and movement. So like heavier suppressors would have a 10 to 15% slower ADS speed and maybe like a 5-10% movement speed reduction. These heavy suppressors would be like the oil filter, PBS4, and the normal suppressor, since they're all heavier, right? The lighter suppressors would only have minimum ADS or movement reduction, just like 5%, you know, something a little bit lighter, but obviously a suppressor adds weight, unlike a muzzle breaker, compensator, or flash hider, you know. This would be ARS, the PBS1, and the R2 suppressor, right? It'd be some middle ground in that, just like cheap stats, you know, where it would kind of affect ADS. Like if you have a heavier thing on the front, it's going to take a little bit while to ADS. That's just the perk of it. If we're buffing some of the other perks of the suppressor, you should have a little bit of a disadvantage, ADS speed being one of them, and movement potentially being one of them too. Movement shouldn't be a drastic thing, but I think it should be a little bit of a reduction. Nowhere near as hideous as the M107 though. And I also want to talk about the range where suppressors are detected, and this is a big reason because PF is mainly a close quarters FPS. You know, all the gunfights kind of last within like 150 studs. So if you have a suppressor that's detected within like 80 studs, you're literally missing out on so much, right? The suppressor becomes useless. And that's what it becomes down to. Suppressors really do feel useless in this game. And I'm gonna list the suppressors in order. I'm gonna go what muzzle velocity loss they have and stud detection and what I'd change it to and the reason why. Okay, so muzzle velocity, it pretty much means a slower bullet. So when I talk about muzzle velocity, it means slower bullets. We'll get into percentages of that, and yeah, just a heads up. So the normal suppressor, it's the heaviest suppressor, and right now it has 20% muzzle velocity loss and a 20 stud detection. And it being the heaviest suppressor, it's pretty quiet, so it should have one of the on the lower end of stud detection, right? We're gonna lower the muzzle velocity down to 15-18%, giving it a little bit better of a chance, but we're gonna reduce the stud detection to 15 studs, which is pretty small. It's the heaviest, it's gonna have a bad ADS time, and it's pretty quiet, so the range should come down. R2 suppressor, it has a 10% muzzle velocity loss. So when we go into the percentage, 10%. So if a gun has 1,000 muzzle velocity, right, it's going to be 10% of that reducted. So it's going to be 900 instead of 1,000, and so on and so forth, right? So 10% muzzle velocity loss and 35 stud detection. We're going to bump that down to 8% muzzle velocity loss and 25 stud detection. Stud detection is a big thing. We're going to drop these down on most of these suppressors. I feel like that would improve the suppressors a lot. But the R2 suppressor is a medium suppressor, so it should be a good compromise between sound suppression and damage range. And you shouldn't really lose a whole lot of muzzle velocity on a medium suppressor. Moving on, the ARS suppressor, 5% muzzle velocity loss and the 80 stud detection. I feel like 5% is pretty standard. I think I wouldn't change that. And I would actually drop down the stud detection from 80 to 45. 80 is just way too much, and it makes it useless, right? 45 is still a lot, too, for a suppressor. For something close quarters like Phantom Forces, 45, move it down, make it somewhat useful, but not super useful like the other ones. Moving on to PBS1, it has 12% muzzle velocity loss and a 40 stud detection. We're going to bump that down to 8% muzzle velocity loss and 30 stud protection. This is also a light suppressor like the ARS, but it's a little bit better. So it's going to have a little bit more muzzle velocity loss, and it's going to have a little bit less of the stud detection because it's a little bit better than the ARS as far as like sound protection goes. But it's definitely up there. Moving on to the PBS4, it's going to have a 15% muzzle velocity loss and a 30 stud detection. I feel like 15% is pretty good on the muzzle velocity loss, and I dropped down from 30 stud detection to 25 stud detection radius because it's a medium suppressor. We want it to be a little bit better close range. Oil filter. I think the oil filter is pretty good at how it is. It's 10% muzzle velocity loss and 5 stud detection. It's the quietest. 5 studs is really close. That's kind of how I wanted the normal suppressor to be in a way. So I thought the oil filter was pretty good. Osprey. I also think the Osprey is pretty balanced. It's an SMG pistol suppressor, and it sits at 15% muzzle velocity loss and 15 stud detection, which for a pistol caliber makes sense. And I said for the Osprey, the recoil reduction will also replicate the ARS, where it helps vertical and horizontal recoil in like 25% of it, right? Overall, most of the suppressors need a closer detection radius. They felt pretty useless. And the game is, like I said, pretty close quarters, and it's not super long range, and most gunfights are really close range, you know. As far as damage range with these barrels and suppressors, like especially the long barrel and short barrel, I don't think they're super noticeable, and I don't really think they need a super big change or a super big rebalance. I think they're good where they sit. The biggest thing for me is the stud detection and recoil reduction. I feel like those would make the suppressors and other stuff a lot more usable. But hey, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. This is a lot of talking, a lot of stuff thrown at you, a lot of stats. So if you have any questions, let me know. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day. Love you guys. See you later. Take it easy. Peace.